All right, good afternoon, everybody, here for another episode of Pick and Pop. And today we'll talk about the fourth day of the NBA playoffs, and three games went on yesterday. Game two in three different series. And of course, there were some exciting games, as to always expect. But start off with the Washington Wizards and Toronto Raptors, the series that I and many anticipated to be a lot closer and more competitive than a lot of matchups between a 1 seed and an 8 seed that did happen last year in the Eastern Conference, where the Bulls got off to a 2-0 lead over the Boston Celtics. And that was a 1 versus 8 matchup. And this year, with two star-studded backcourts going at each other, certainly seemed to be a really good matchup. And yesterday, the Toronto Raptors came out with all cylinders firing. They scored 130 points en route to a 130-119 victory over the Washington Wizards. Their lead was well over 20 at several points. The Wizards did come back and cut it within 5 at one point in the fourth quarter, as the Wizards outscored Toronto by 8 in the third and were pretty much dead even throughout the fourth. I think really looking at what Toronto was able to do in this game after shaking those first game nerves, I think it was 10 in a row that they had lost as far as game ones, and especially, in that hostile environment. And I say that not just for the opposing team, but it is a very pressure-filled environment, especially with the expectations surrounding this team and a lot of what has happened in the Eastern Conference. I think especially after everybody has seen what happened with the Cavaliers and the Pacers in game one, and it'll really be interesting to see how Cleveland responds tonight. But in the context of Toronto, there is a lot of pressure playing in that environment, especially against an 8 seed that is not your typical 8 seed. I mean, this is a team that has one of the best point guards in the game, one of the best shooting guards in the game. And, their starting 5 can really compete with anybody. Marcin Gortat, who only had 12 minutes of playtime yesterday, so he's just kind of been phased out of that rotation. They worked in a lot of Ty Lawson, who was just signed prior to the playoffs, and a lot of Kelly Oubre as well, who did get into a rhythm last night. But Bradley Beal, 3 of 11, 1 of 5 from 3. That's just not going to do it in a playoff game. And I think that's especially frustrating for the Wizards, because this is a game to where offensively everything but that was going their way. I mean, my only other problem with what happened with Washington last night, I wasn't able to watch a game because I don't have NBA TV, is the fact that Otto Porter didn't attempt a three-point shot. And, while Toronto is really good at limiting three-point attempts, that's something to where, especially for teams going to score 119 points, if you shoot 45% from 3 on a regular basis, you have to be able to put up some shots in a playoff game. But, John Wall gives you 29, 4, and 9. And then you go to the bench. Mike Scott gives you 20. Ian Mahinmi gives you 12. Kelly Oubre and Ty Lawson, 14 apiece. 8 assists from Ty Lawson as well. They shoot 48.8% from the game, 45.5% from 3, and he hit almost all of their free throws, but they just weren't able to defend or slow down what Toronto was bringing to the table. And especially in the context of DeMar DeRozan, who hit 3 threes, 37 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and 14 field goals on 23 shots. So really efficient night for DeMar DeRozan. Had his playoff career high last night and leading the Raptors to that win. Kyle Lowry had 12 assists to go with 13 points as well, and a double-double from Jonas Valanciunas, 19 and 14 for him to go with an assist and 2 blocks. Their starting lineup just had it together. Fred VanVleet only played a little under 3 minutes, 2 minutes and 49 seconds, did not score. And the Raptors are going to try to work him back in the rotation as he's coming back from injury. But off the bench last night, it was one of those nights to where CJ Miles caught fire. And that's something to where if you're playing the Raptors, you just kind of have to be aware of one of those 3-point shooters. One of them is going to catch fire, whether it's going to be CJ Miles. I mean, you think that Kyle Lowry, you take that, you just assume that Serge Ibaka can, of course, catch fire like he did in game one, especially now that guys like OG Anunoby and now Jonas Valanciunas, who shoots threes, and then DeLon Wright as well. All of these guys can catch fire at any given time. And really, when you have Fred VanVleet in the rotation, that creates quite a bit of an issue. But you get 18 from CJ Miles, 11 from DeLon Wright, and the Raptors look good. I am honestly really impressed with this team. I thought they were going to at least lose one of these first 2 games at home, because I think the Wizards are a hungry team coming into the playoffs and that they're, healthy finally. But the Raptors are really impressive. I mean, they faced a good amount of adversity. They let go of leads both in game one and in game two. Well, in game one, they came back from deficit and then let go of a late lead and were able to hang on. Then game two, kind of letting that huge lead dwindle and then having that, that veteran leadership there by DeMar DeRozan, who has a few playoff runs under his belt at this time and was able to, get his team to calm down and be able to close out the win. And that is really big. I mean, this Wizards team is not a team that's easy to get past. And I think the rest of the series is still going to be entertaining. I think you could really expect Bradley Beal to have a big bounce back game coming up in game three. But this Raptors team is for real. And I think right now they're certainly the odds-on favorite to represent the Eastern Conference in the NBA Finals. Going on from that, though, in the second game of the night, it was game two between the Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics, which was anticipated to be one of the best series of the first round. Game one certainly did not disappoint in that fashion, but game two had a bit more offense to it for one, and it was a lot of the same as far as who was contributing on both sides. The outcome, however, was a bit different, that favoring the Boston Celtics, with the Milwaukee Bucks once again got a lot out of Giannis Antetokounmpo, got a lot out of Chris Middleton, but really struggled to get any production outside of that. They got 10 from Malcolm Brogdon on the bench, who is on a minutes restriction, can only play around, ideally less than 20 minutes, but 20 minutes at max, played 18 and a half last night. Shabazz Muhammad got them 11. But, I mean, looking at this roster, Joe Prunty had 13 players play for the Milwaukee Bucks last night. And in a playoff game, when you're really that desperate to try and find something that works, try and find somebody with a hot hand because nobody had it going, that's really going to be a problem. And I think the Boston Celtics adjusted really well defensively to every wrench that was thrown their way. But still, I mean, this is a starting five. The outside of Giannis and Chris Middleton has just not been giving them much. John Henson has been pretty effective at times on the defensive glass, but only 6 rebounds last night. And that's something where you have to figure he's got to be more of an impact in that regard when he's a guy that can put up a double-double on any given night and on most nights at times. And you look at Eric Bledsoe, who once again was a no-show with 12 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 5 of 13 from the field in 34 minutes. He's got to give you more. And then, of course, there was a bit of a controversy after the game. After Sunday's game, Terry Rozier, I don't know if he accidentally did this. It would be pretty creative if it wasn't on accident. Referred to Eric Bledsoe as Drew Bledsoe, the former New England Patriots quarterback who preceded Tom Brady. And Eric Bledsoe, when asked about Terry Rozier and his performance in game two after last night's game, said, I don't know who the fuck that is. So looking at it from that perspective, Eric Bledsoe is, in a position, he's putting himself in a position, I should say, to where he really probably shouldn't be saying something like that, especially because it's been 2 games to now to where he has been thoroughly outplayed by Terry Rozier. And Terry Rozier isn't exactly somebody that just came into the league. Granted, he's a very young player. This is his 3rd year in the league, 2nd year, kind of having this real playoff experience. He did get a good amount of time back in 2016 in their series against the Hawks. But this is somebody that has now outplayed Eric Bledsoe 2 games in a row. And obviously that does not mean that this is something that's going to continue for the rest of the series. In fact, I think Eric Bledsoe is probably going to have a really good game in game 3, but he just had nothing going. And on top of the fact that big play in Sunday where Terry Rozier makes the step back 3 and crosses up Eric Bledsoe in the play, I just find it a little bit ironic that he is now making that comment. I think a lot of people in the sports media have kind of been saying the same thing, that he probably shouldn't be saying that after being vastly outperformed. But I think especially now at this point, he's added a bit more fuel to the fire, maybe added fuel to the fire for his team. And I think if you're a Milwaukee Bucks fan, or, if you're a player on the Bucks for that matter, that can be turned around into a good thing if still having that level of confidence, especially going back home and knowing that ultimately you certainly have the best player on the floor in the series on your team. Those are things that certainly work in their favor. And I think especially because they've been a better home team, that can work in their favor. And I do think that the Bucks are going to get at least one of these 2 games. I don't anticipate the Celtics sweeping the Bucks. I think it's very, very possible that we'll be going to a game 5 tied at 2. but I think the Bucks have to make a lot of adjustments and especially have to figure out what they're going to do with that 2-guard spot. There was a stat I saw at how much the Boston backcourt has outplayed Milwaukee so far in these first 2 games. And of course, yesterday, Jaylen Brown put on a show at 30 points, 12 of 22 from the field, 5 of 12 from 3-point land, and Terry Rozier, 23 points, outscoring them 91-25 so far in this series. They're going to have to find somebody that gives them production at the 2-guard, and it hasn't been Tony Snell. And I think if you're Joe Prunty, you have to consider everything, whether it's starting Malcolm Brogdon on the minutes restriction and still trying to find a platoon later on in the game, or what I think is pretty possible is that they may toss Jason Terry into that starting spot. And I don't think that that's a bad idea with his leadership and having that veteran presence on the floor at the beginning of the game. If there's one thing that the Milwaukee Bucks have seen in both of these games, it's been a rampant quick start by the Boston Celtics. And I think that having Jason Terry on the floor, especially going back home where you'll have the crowd to kind of help you dictate things early on, having that veteran leadership presence physically on the floor and also somebody that's capable of hitting shots could really work wonders for the Bucks early on in games and put them in a position to where they don't have to play catch up later on. But the Bucks certainly have to make a lot of adjustments if they're going to intend to win this series. They shot 60% from the field last night. So losing by 14 and having that going on, it means that there's a lot of problems. And as we just discussed, there certainly are. The third game last night was, I did fall asleep before the completion of it, but it was an incredibly exciting game. I was watching all of the Dawkins highlight videos of it this morning between the Pelicans and the Trailblazers. Game 2, Portland widely expected to bounce back. New Orleans got off to a quick start, but Portland was in control at halftime. New Orleans had a big third quarter, and that, of course, set up a very, very exciting fourth quarter. And I think when looking at the series beforehand, and especially when I looked at it again after game 1, being like, okay, well, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are just not going to be that cold again. Well, they kind of were, again, at home, which is really concerning for the Portland Trailblazers. Lillard shoots 7 of 18, 1 of 7 from 3, has just been absolutely shot down. And CJ McCollum, 9 of 21, 3 of 8 from 3, not too much better. They got a good game from Al-Farouq Aminu, who had 14 points, 15 rebounds, and was 4 of 6 from 3. They're able to get Maurice Harkless almost 30 minutes of game time. He hasn't played since March. He got 11 points and 5 of 5 shooting off the bench. So that was a really good sign for Portland. But I think, they end up losing by 9 in this game. New Orleans pulling away late. As I was kind of talking about after game 1, this is a team that I just don't think should really be messed around with or taken lightly with or without DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, there is a real identity on this team. I think they're really well coached, better coached than a lot of people would like to admit. I think Alvin Gentry really is one of the more underrated coaches in the NBA. And I think this year he really let that be known. And I think it's so much more than just Anthony Davis, who did not have the crazy game that he did in game 1, still at 22 points, 13 rebounds with an assist, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. But of course, last night, that was a Jrue Holiday show. And, you have the 33 points, 9 assists, 3 rebounds, and 14 to 24 shooting, but it was really the Jrue Holiday show for the second game in a row on the defensive end. And this is such a big reason why Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, and you could throw Evan Turner in there because he was 0 for 6 in 20 minutes of play last night and did not score a point. They've been so integral at being able to shut all those guys down. And that's something that you never figured would be a problem with Portland, that to an extent, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are unguardable. They're 2 guys that just have extremely long ranges, that are very consistent typically, that are able to drive the lane and keep you honest and get to the line. These are all, characteristics of superstar guards, and that's what they are. They are superstar guards in this league, but Jrue Holiday is putting everybody on notice that he is a premier defender in this league, and I think that's finally going to be recognized this year. I think he's probably going to get at least second team all defense, because without his contribution, I mean, we could talk about how Anthony Davis went MVP mode after Boogie Cousins went out, but I mean, Jrue Holiday has been so consistent for them all season on both ends of the floor. And he's really, I think, proving to be one of the more underrated players in the league. He's somebody that, you don't really talk about in that wing position as a difference maker, but he has certainly been a difference maker on this team. And I think maybe part of the reason for that being is he's never really played on playoff teams. He was on that 2012 Sixers team that took the Celtics to 7 games in the second round. But that's the deepest playoff run that he has under his belt. And last night, I mean, I just feel like this is a moment that he's really anticipated for a while. Maybe some, this is just me talking crap essentially, but he does have a brother in this league that is noticeably not as good of a player, that does have a championship ring with the 2015 Golden State Warriors. So maybe a little bit sibling rivalry is extra motivation in this situation, but this is a guy that's played in New Orleans for a while. He has a lot of chemistry with Anthony Davis, and he's really, really throughout his career become an exceptional defender. And he's really put on a show, shutting down Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, a backcourt that really has been unstoppable all season. They have just been, for the most part, a non-factor in these first 2 games in their own building. I think it is worth noting moving forward that New Orleans is a really good road team. They're a bit underwhelming at home, and I certainly think that Portland is going to be really ready to play come game 3. And I think it's I'm expecting Portland to win game 3 is what I'm trying to say. I think a lot of I think New Orleans may experience some fatigue in this upcoming game, but it certainly didn't show last night, and especially on the end of Rajon Rondo, who was in full vintage playoff mode. 16 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists, hit 2 threes, including one that was a dagger in Portland's heart at the end of the game. So 2 incredibly impressive wins on the road for the New Orleans Pelicans, and they put themselves in really, really good position to potentially advance to the second round. So I'm really impressed with this team. I'm not that surprised so far, but of course the work is not done. They do have to go back home and play a team that had a lot of expectations coming into the postseason this year, and I think is really going to be hungry to try and pick up a win. And I would be very, very impressed if New Orleans is able to find a way to neutralize Lillard and McCollum like they've been able to do in these first 2 games in game 3. But other than that, that's all I have for you today. 3 more playoff games tonight, starting in around an hour and a half. Pacers and the Cavaliers. That'll be huge to see how Cleveland responds. It'll also be huge for me because I'm going to game 3. That'll certainly impact how exciting it'll be, but I think it'll be really exciting either way. The Jazz and the Thunder in game 2, Oklahoma City looking to go up 2-0. And the Timberwolves and the Rockets in game 2, Minnesota looking to follow up on their strong effort in game 1. James Harden, who had 44 in game 1, looking to lead his team to a 2-0 lead. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow.